This right here is going to be the ultimate camera comparison between the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, iPhone XS Max, and the Huawei P30 Pro. And so, starting with standard video taken on the phone's rear cameras, they all record in 4K, but the P30 loses a few points for not being able to record 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. You can probably tell that Samsung has tuned their colors to look very similar to the iPhones, and that's kind of a good thing. The iPhone is for many people the gold standard for consistent, reliable smartphone video. And speaking of reliable, the Huawei is not so much. The phone is set to its normal color option, but even then, its vibrance swings wildly depending on the scene you're capturing. Also, for the first time ever, I've designed a scoring system for camera tests. If you want to know the exact formula for how it's being calculated, it's all in the description, but long story short, more points equals better. So let's see which phone wins. It's good to see that with the Note 10 Plus, Samsung has retained the same ultrawide camera as the S10 had, which is even wider than the ultrawide on the P30, which in itself is far wider than what the iPhone can capture, because that phone doesn't have an ultrawide at all. Zooming while taking video leads to quite an interesting result, because both the Note and the iPhone have 2x optical zoom cameras. When we're magnifying only by 2x, those two phones pull ahead of the P30 Pro. But when we go to 5x and beyond, the P30 starts to use its 5x optical zoom camera, which places it well above the other two. With this new addition of a time-of-flight camera on the back, the Note 10 Plus can now take what they call live focus video, or in other words, a bunch of video modes that allow you to separate the foreground from the background. I'd say I do like this glitch effect, and it's never a bad thing to have new features to play around with, but none of these are hugely reliable on the Note, and the P30 Pro almost always does a better job. The iPhone doesn't have one of these sensors at all, and so it doesn't have any equivalent camera modes, but because this stuff is kinda gimmicky and not everyone's going to use it, I'm not going to place too much emphasis on it. Now, Samsung's Note 10 has another interesting new feature, audio zoom, which can amplify the audio of whatever specific thing you zoom in on. So I've got a phone playing music on a table here, and whereas with the iPhone and the P30 Pro, zooming in does nothing to the sound, when you do the same with Samsung, the volume of the subject starts to rise. Have a listen to this. Stabilization at 4K is good on all phones, but the Huawei seems just a little jerkier than the other two. And when we lower this resolution to 1080p, the Note can use Samsung's new and improved Super Steady feature. It uses a better gyro sensor than the S10 before it, and this allows for practically shake-free videos, but the caveat is that it does need to crop in, so you might need to take a step back to fit everything in. That said, the trade-off is worth it. In this frame right here, I'm walking pretty quickly sideways, and the view on the Note 10 Plus, that big view in the background, that's almost unchanged, whereas on the other two it's moving around a lot. All three flagships can record slow-motion video at a few different frame rates, and you might be able to tell, the Samsung and the iPhone's footage looks almost identical, with Samsung just having a tiny bit more artificial sharpness added. The P30 is definitely trailing and also needs to crop in when taking any kind of slow-mo. What is good is that the Note and the P30 Pro can also take bursts of super slow motion video at 960 frames per second, but again, Samsung's is far better quality and can also record for longer periods of time. The 960 FPS you're seeing on the Huawei is technically speaking actually only 480 and is using software to interpolate the rest. Now, just before we jump into the nighttime test, we've got to talk about daytime photography, because for a lot of people, this is the most important category. One of the first things I noticed when I started using the Note 10 was that the dynamic range can reach even greater heights than that of the iPhone. That is a real feat. It manages to consistently catch the blue in the sky, whilst making sure shadows aren't too dark. These are all great for daytime photography, that much is clear, but it does seem like a close battle between the Note and the iPhone, with the Huawei just not quite there. That phone tends to either lose a little bit of detail in the bright areas, or sometimes make the dark areas too dark, and crushes the blacks. In this shot right here, this requires intense levels of high dynamic range to capture everything, and you can see looking through the windows towards the back right that the Note 10 does this better than the iPhone, which does it better than the Huawei. Sometimes the iPhone wins as well. In this shot right here, the road on the far left looks a world apart on this phone. The ultrawides come in handy again for Samsung and Huawei, and with photos especially, their field of view is even larger than when taking video, and so the difference between the normal lens and the ultrawide here is staggering. It can be the difference between capturing one floor of a building to the entire building, and is also a really cool way just to make a standard shot look a little bit more dramatic. You might have guessed, Huawei is gonna pull some points back when it comes to zoom. With a 5x magnification, Huawei shots are not just more detailed, but also have a nice contrast to them. To look at this in a bit more detail, here's a photo taken with no zoom at all. At 2 times, the Note and the iPhone are pumping out way better quality shots than the Huawei, which is not only using a digital zoom at this point, but also has a slightly weaker dynamic range. At 5 times, Huawei's detail jumps right to the top as its telephoto lens is now activated, but dynamic range on that phone is still just not as good as on the other two. At 10 times, the P30 is still pin sharp, which is wildly impressive. Now, one not very often answered question is macro. How close can each phone get whilst keeping shots in focus? And there's a clear pattern. It's Huawei, then Samsung, then iPhone. You've probably already heard of the iPhone being the king of portrait mode photography. Well, it has just got a potent rival in the Galaxy Note 10 Plus. Armed with a new time-of-flight sensor on the Samsung, edge detection is brilliant and the background blur powerful but realistic. Also, both the Samsung and the iPhone, they use their telephoto cameras to take portraits, which has the caveat of needing to take a step back, but almost always just looks better. Because the Huawei has this crazy 5 times telephoto camera, it's too much, and so that phone has to use its primary camera. You can zoom in manually though. Also, whilst both the Note and the Huawei take a hit to dynamic range when using portrait mode, the iPhone doesn't seem to at all. Right, let's talk about low light, and starting with video. Whilst the Note produces bright video in the dark, the quality leaves quite a lot to be desired. The iPhone is darker, but even then better than the Samsung. I take a dark video over a grainy video any day. But then you've got the Huawei. Low light video on the P30 Pro is both bright and noise-free. It's not even close. Low-light, ultra-wide video is an option on the 2 Android phones, which does result in darker footage because that camera is less good than each phone's main sensor, but still cool to have. What might be more useful is the P30 Pro's zoom. This video right here is 5 times zoomed in very low light, and the P30 barely even takes a hit. This is a really specialized phone, and it's at times like these that I'm quite appreciative of that. Okay, there's actually an unintended consequence of low light, the reduction in quality of electronic stabilization. You can tell on the Samsung that the lack of light is causing a little bit of artificial shake, but this issue is far worse on the P30 Pro. It feels like the iPhone on the other hand is relatively unfazed. I was expecting the Note 10 Plus to be good in low light, but not this good. It feels like the software has taken a real leap since the S10 was launched, resulting in bright, vibrant and sharp photos. If you look at the red sign at the top here, it's actually managed to better expose it and control the bright areas than the infamous P30 Pro. The Note isn't actually capturing as much information as that phone, and this becomes clear if we crop into a nighttime photo 20 times, but from a distance, a lot of its shots actually look better. The iPhone is the weakest out of the 3, that much is clear. You can still use that ultra-wide camera at night, and it's a complete joy. You capture a totally new perspective, and the 5 times optical zoom on the Huawei really transcends the other two in this admittedly kind of niche scenario. There's little to complain about with flash. Brightness looks almost identical, but the Note 10 retains a cooler color temperature, which is good here. With selfies in low light, they're all different. I like the fact that Samsung and Huawei have a wider front camera, better if you wanted to get a group shot, but the iPhone's photos are more evenly exposed, although a little bit dark. When there's a lot of light, the Note and the P30 are generally more prone to overexposure, but in most cases it's a good result on all 3. I do like the slight extra vibrance boost that Samsung is now consistently adding to photos. With video, though, the smart HDR that the iPhone uses really comes into its own. It's such a powerful bit of software, it can even control the brightness of the sun itself. That said, the Note has a real advantage in that its front-facing video is in 4K resolution. That is a quantum leap over the 1080p on almost every other phone, but its stabilization isn't quite as good on this setting. You might also be wondering about audio quality, so here's a clip that I was originally planning to put at the beginning of the video.
Alright guys, welcome to a camera comparison between the brand new Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, iPhone XS Max and Huawei P30 Pro. And we're out here in New York for this launch. This is going to be incredible.
Okay, so the scores are in, and the Note finishes right on top with 717 points, the P30 Pro a fair bit below that at 689, and the iPhone a long way behind that phone at 608. Generally speaking, in the things that it does do, the iPhone is an incredible camera, but a combination of the fact that the other two have an overwhelming amount of extra options to play with, and the fact that it has poorer low-light performance just puts it that bit behind. Anyways, the main takeaway here is that the Note is an exceptional camera. It not only has a plethora of modes, but in almost all cases consistently performs well within them. If you enjoyed this video, then I recently created a mega bit of content where I destroyed every single Galaxy S smartphone to date just to see if smartphones are getting weaker over time. So I'm going to link that from here, and my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I will catch you in the next one.